All right, man, let's get it.
It's time.
Turn it.
It's every time. It's every time. I'm consistent with the mission every time. Drip up on my wrist and neck, you know I shine. No capping when I'm rapping, you can check your life a line.
It's every
time. It's every time. I'm consistent with the mission every time. Drip up on my wrist and neck, you know I shine. No capping when I'm rapping, you can check your life a line.
I do it every time. What's happening, man? We back with Board Talk Podcast, man. This is episode number 5, The Art of Mixing Part 2, featuring my guy IsRael Musiq. If y'all listen to Part 1, then y'all know, man, it was packed with so much stuff. But I want to give y'all a round of applause for being here. There's so many gems that we had to break this thing up, so I don't want to waste no time. We're going to get IsRael back on the line, and we're going to dive into part 2 of The Art of Mixing on the Board Talk episode number 5. Let's go ahead and do it. And, of course, this is Kyren Monteiro of Frequency Canvas. We calling my guy right now.
Yo.
Back again, IsRael Musiq, man. Board Talk episode number 5, man. The Art of Mixing Part 2, man. Round of applause, man, for my guy IsRael Musiq, the legend, man. So IsRael, in the first part of this series that we doing with you, man, we got into your life story about how you grew up in DC and came out of that, and how you became a Christian and started on that spiritual journey, then got involved in the Christian hip hop, aka the CHH market, and became a legendary producer and engineer. Then we ventured into how you went to SweetWater and started to become high ranking in sales at SweetWater, which is the biggest music retailer in the world. And then we start diving into the art of mixing, and you was talking about, the basics of mixing is basically just, at the very simplistic, term, is, just turning faders up and down and printing. For you youngins, that's called exporting. And, bringing that to a listenable stereo format, to be streamed and or played on CDs or whatever people get into. And what we picked up off was you was starting to give advice to up-and-coming audio engineers, and we were talking about, you said you didn't really need a lot of fancy equipment, and I agree with that, although this Negro has inspired me to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on equipment. So, no, you do not need fancy equipment, but fancy equipment is nice, and he has mixed on very fancy equipment, so do not let him fool you, and has made a good living off of...
No, you're right. I mean, I ain't said that it ain't useful. I mean, you can take the stairs if you want to, but they ain't been in the elevator for a reason. But you can still get to the 20th floor with stairs. It's just going to take you longer, and you're going to be sweating. But I take the elevator, me personally. The elevator is the high end equipment. I mean, I'm not knocking. But if you want to get to the 20th floor, if you're that determined, you don't need an elevator. You're going to walk up the stairs. So I already walked up the stairs. You heard my story. I started out on the PlayStation.
Okay. So we diving in right here. So we gonna pick up. So we was talking about equipment, and the last piece of advice you got is even with subscriptions, if you can't afford $100 a month off of mixing, you don't need to be doing it. That's basically where part 1 left off at. But let's keep talking about giving advice to up and coming engineers who want to be mixing engineers, especially. And let's talk about the equipment. When we say high end equipment, that just doesn't mean outboard gear or analog. Like, there's a such thing as high end digital, because as you were saying, you can buy a DAW, which is a digital audio workstation, aka the software that you use to record, mix, and master in. You can buy a DAW and have stock plugins. So spending $200 on one compressor, that's kind of like high-end plugins, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't necessarily, you can have a laptop and still have high-end digital Just like you can have high-end outboard gear. And you know my philosophy, I challenge what high-end means. So if I spend $150 on a LA2A emulation, and then I spend $1,000 on a warm audio emulation in the analog world, I debate that the $1,000 warm audio LA2A is the new multi-million-dollar studio mindset, because that $150 emulation digitally is like 90% there at the end of the day. Then if I'm comparing the actual analog compressor of the warm audio to the $4,000 original one, it doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? Unless you working with Beyonce and Drake consistently, it doesn't make sense at all at the end of the, and by the way, a lot of high-end studios are getting warm audio. A lot of them high-end studios are selling stuff and getting more Pultecs, more LA2As, more 1170s. Anyways, sorry for you newbies that's lost on what we're talking about. But hey, man, we back on the Board Talk podcast. IsRael this year. Let's dive back into the art of mixing, man. Let's dive into this gear. You were talking about, you know, the importance of stuff. But even furthermore than just the gear that people can buy, let's talk about the professional mindset as a business person and studio etiquettes and dealing with people. Now, you worked at SweetWater, so I'm sure you learned a lot about customer service and client experience. There's a lot of these up-and-coming mixing engineers who have no clue on how to properly run businesses as an independent contractor, as an LLC. Let's talk about some of that stuff from your experience as a professional engineer and producer, and then working in sales at SweetWater. Like, talk about that importance of being professional and knowing how to run your business the right way.
Yeah, man. So, yeah, I mean, SweetWater helped me out a lot with that because, you know, I didn't, you know, even though I was selling music equipment and, you know, surrounded by music equipment, it really wasn't a music job. You know what I mean? It really was a sales job, which is all about making sure you put the customer first. Putting the customer first, whatever their needs are. I mean, it's very important as a mixing engineer because it's not your song. So first things first.
Say that again. Say that again. Say that one more time, man.
You gotta put the artist first and whatever they want because it's not your song at the end of the day. Like, so if they say, hey, we want this part of the song to have all reverb, and to your ears it sounds like trash, remember, you didn't make the song. That's what the artists want. Your job is a support. Your job is simply there to make sure their vision comes true. Think about yourself as a contractor. They come up with the design. The home buyer comes up with the design. Hey, we want a 5-bedroom house. We want the basement to look like this. We want the bathroom to have this kind of curtain. We want this. Your job isn't to go in and say, well, I don't like that chandelier in this kitchen. You should get this chandelier. Your job is to say, okay, and you figure out how to put the chandelier that they want in. So that's your job as an engineer. Now, granted, that's not a hard and fast rule, but that is a rule. First and foremost, you should at least hear the artist's vision out. Now, if you think another vision would sound better, then do 2 mixes. If you're that confident in your vision that whatever you want for the song is better, then do what they want first, and then in your spare time, do what you want, and then send this over and say, hey, I actually thought it would sound better like this. What do you think? Don't just start doing things without the artist's permission, because that's not it's not your song. So the first thing is put the artist first, and the second thing is direct communication. And that's very important. Something I had to learn. This isn't something I just knew, because fuzzy communication only causes problems. And that's just human interaction. So things like, send a session over and I'll mix it. That's very fuzzy. You know, you shouldn't be talking to clients like that. What format? Are they going to send it in Pro Tools format? Are they going to send it in Studio One format? Are they going to send just waves? But the thing about it is, as an engineer, you set that tone.
Can I throw something in? Can I throw something in?
Absolutely.
From my experience, I don't care if you're the most legendary engineer of all time, like a Chris Lord-Alge, to the guy who's just starting. Never, ever, ever, in my opinion, ask for a session from format from whatever DAW, get the WAV or the AIF files and the AIFF files. And the reason that I say that is because even if you have the same DAW, what if they have a older version, or what if something becomes incompatible? So like my recommendation, especially the new engineers who are, you know, working out of the house and out in commercial facilities, get the WAV files from the people. And then if you need different versions, if you need one with effects, if you need one without effects, then do that. But I would always recommend getting the WAV files.
That's solid advice. I mean, I don't ask for sessions, me personally, because not only if it's incompatible, but if they send over the session, they may have plugins in the session that you don't have. So if they're using UAD on all of the tracks and you don't have a UAD, then you just going to get a raw session. So you want to make sure that the artist prints those files exactly the way that they have it in their session. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And a lot of that is from your writer. Like engineers don't have a writer. They don't have a format. So that would be, let's get practical. I don't like to talk in theories too much. Go ahead and write down all of your requirements. Hey, I need the kick to be labeled this way. I need the session to be labeled that way. No more than 24 tracks, or whatever your requirements are that you come up with. And you can go online. I mean, Chris Little Algae actually has his writer of what he needs the session to be like before he even starts mixing it. So that
he has that public.
Yeah, it's public. It's out there. That's how I actually started my writer. I looked at his. I downloaded his off the internet, and I tweaked it to where I needed stuff because he still mixes on tape. So his requirements is, hey, I need this to be labeled this way on track 24 because of my tape machine. I'm not using tape, so I took that part out. So look, man, as an engineer, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's no need. If they already have a wheel, your job is to polish the wheel. So you don't want to do more work than what you require. So yeah, I took one of my favorite engineers' writer, tweaked it up to what I needed, and then that's now my professional writer. So before anybody send any tracks over, go ahead and send that over, and I trust and believe that's going to save a lot of headache for you sending that over. Because if it's not right, what I found just from personal experience when I didn't have a writer and telling the artist what I needed, they would send over anything, and then I would be like, oh, this ain't right. And they were like, well, you didn't ask for it. Or I would be like, well, I can work with this. And now I spent an hour correcting vocal pitches when I should have just asked for the vocal tuning to be done initially. So now I'm spending an hour, and the more, as an engineer, the more you listen to the song, the worse it's going to sound. And I want people to really understand, the longer it takes you to mix a record, the worse it's going to sound, because your ears get accustomed to it, your ears get fatigued. So you want to be able to, as soon as you upload the session into your DAW of choice, you want to be able to pull the faders up, immediately start EQing, compressing, or whatever you do. You want to have a great first impression of what it is and immediately know what's wrong and what's right with it. So that would be number 2. So first, put the customer first. Whatever they want, you do. Number 2, establish the ground rules. And number 3, I would say this is the biggest one. You need to establish whether you're going to charge for revisions, because I don't care, like what you just said, you're the biggest engineer in the world to the smallest engineer. The artists 9 times out of 10 are not going to be satisfied with the first mix you send them. So you're going to, hey, oh man, now that you did this, can you try to put delays here? And then now that's a revision. Are you going to charge for that, or are you going to do it for free? How many revisions are you going to do until you just give up on it? So that's another one, is, are you going to charge for revisions? But that should be in your writer as well. Also,
where can the Chris Lord Algae writer be found at for people who want to look that up? You know, maybe
it's on gearspace.com.
Okay.
Gearspace.com is where it is. And I actually found that I probably was maybe 21, 22. So this is well over 13 years ago.
What can they type in Google for that to come up?
I would say CLA Mix Writer.
Okay.
WRITER, CLA Mix Writer. It may pop up, but people really asking for it, they can hit me up at IsRael Musiq at Gmail. I still have mine, so I'm happy to pass that out because, you know, my job is to help other engineers be great. So if someone's really looking for it, they can hit me up there, and I'll give them mine, and they can tweak it to their liking or keep it the same. It doesn't matter to me.
I have we got a public one at frequencycanvas.com.
Oh, well, yeah, man. It's right there, man. So you ain't even got to ask me. It's right there. But just something to establish. It's essentially a contract between you and the artist on how we're going to conduct business on this record. And it's not like a physical contract where you sign it and I sign it. It's not a legal binding contract, but it is a not mutual, but the word I'm looking for, it's a mutual understanding of what's going to go down, right? So that will clear up a lot of confusion moving back and forth between the artists because, you know, back in the day, you used to mix records right there with the artist in the same room. These days, you're going back and forth. So the least amount of time you can waste communicating about simple things. Oh man, I hear this song, but you didn't send over like this vocal, or where's the lead guitar, or don't even work on records like that because it should be established in your writer. So, and last but not least, make sure you have communication before, during, and after the record. I can't stress that enough. Before the record is mixed, that whole inquiry stage, how much you charge, this and the third, boom, you talking. While you're mixing, make sure you even just send the artist a text message. Oh man, hey, I'm working on the record. It's turning out great, or I'm having trouble with this, or whatever it is. Communicate there. Then once you send it over, the artist accepts that this is great. Circle back around, you know, maybe 3 days later, a week later, because they're going to be showing that record to their friends or their, you know, family. So then circle back around and say, hey man, we're like, what did everybody else think about the mix? Because that artist, that's their baby, so they're biased. So they only understand that the mix sounds better than what they gave you, but that's not the public's opinion. So just say it like that, like, man, you showed it to your homeboys. What do they think about the mix? How they like that 808? And then that does two things. One, you're going to learn what you did wrong, or two, you're going to learn that you did a good job, and it also re-solidifies that you did a good job to the artist. So you can't lose by circling back around, you know, a week later or whatever time you decide. You can't lose. Just circle back around. Don't wait till the record releases and then post it on your website like, yo, this is dope. No, you don't know if it's dope. Ask the artist, because they're going to show the record. So that would be my three things. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, absolutely, man. That's definitely a lot of wisdom, for sure, man. Now I want to dedicate. It's taken us a while to get to this, even in two parts, but I think there's been so many gems given to people, especially since you ain't got to pay to listen to this. So you know what I mean? Like, people definitely need to take all of this in. I really want to get to the art of mixing. You are a person who directly taught me, and I'm here. I have major label credits and everything. The studio I sit in, the knowledge, a lot of things that you extended to me, and now I'm trying to take that and pave that forward. And prime example is this podcast that we're trying to, you know, get started and get out organically to people. Let's talk about the art of mixing, man. When it comes to mixing, it is very technical, right? It's fundamental. So you have gain stage, and you have things that you need to learn on paper, signal flow, signal routing, how consoles work, and different microphone types and different cables, different equalizer types, different compressors. Like, there's so many things, different speakers and physics to room. Like, there's so many things that goes into the fundamentals of mixing. But just as much as it is the education, the fundamentals of it, there's also the art of it, which is, you know, inspired the name of my company, Frequency Canvas, which is off of inspiration of your philosophy and how you think. So let's dive into the art of mixing. When a mixing engineer is working with an artist, every mixing engineer, whether they realize it or not, they have a sound, They're going to bring a vibe and creativity to the record. What do you think a mixing engineer's responsibility is creatively to the records? And you just take it from there. I mean, there's automation. There's so many. Literally, the mixing engineer could essentially become a music producer in a way, at that point. But let's talk about the art of mixing, man, and you just take it from here, however you feel.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm big on the fundamentals. You know what I mean? You gotta have the fundamentals down. And I didn't have the fundamentals down. I started out on the creative side because I didn't really know what an expander was versus a gate versus a compressor. I didn't know what a phaser was versus a chorus. So I had to go backwards. But, after doing this for so long and winning awards and working with Grammy Award winners and all of that good stuff, man, you got to start with the fundamentals. So what are the fundamentals? Gain staging. You really need to learn gain staging. So before I even mix a track, I will go in and make sure that all of the levels are hitting at 0 dB VU. And if you don't have this, young engineers, this is the best tip I can give you probably out this whole podcast. Download yourself a free VU meter, because the meters that are in your DAW are based on digital scale. But digital scale is not analog scale. And all of these plugins that you're listening to, the reason why, like, when I use the SSL EQ from Waves and you use the SSL EQ from Waves, yours sound different, or like, man, that sounds small or it sounds thin, is because you're sending way too much signal into that plugin because they're basing it off of analog values. So how do you do that? You put the VU meter on that individual track. Me personally, I put it on the master track and then solo each individual track.
Easiest way.
Yeah, the easiest way. You don't want to put it on, if it's 100 tracks, you're not going to put a VU meter on everyone. Just put it on the last track on the stereo out and then begin the solo. And then don't turn the fader up and down. You want to go through and turn your actual gain down, or your trim is what we would call it, and make sure that the signal is hitting 0 dB. It's not going over, it's not going under. That will allow you to properly feed your plugin, because a lot of engineers, they can't even boost a signal by 15 dB. They're like, oh man, this thing is not bright enough. Let me turn the high end up. But then now it sounds distorted. It's because you're sending way too much signal in it to begin with. I can boost 30 dB on my vocal because it's not actually sending that much signal to the plugin, so I'm not distorting. So that's the first and foremost thing you want to do, is gain stage. From there, before I even EQ, I will go ahead and get a basic mix, like what we talked about in the first episode. Just get the faders sounding right. Let the song keep playing and get the faders to sound right. The record should sound great just by mixing the faders up and down. I mean, I've mixed Marvin Gaye records. Obviously, I'm not the original engineer, but I've got the stems from all the old good soul records that sound great. And I was amazed when I actually did that exercise. And I did that by myself. Downloaded the Marvin Gaye stems from What's Going On. And literally, only thing I had to do was turn things up and down. And I'm like, wow, this sounds incredible just by itself. Obviously, it was recorded with $1 million studio, but that principle is still the same. So once you get that done, then we can go ahead and get on the creative side. Hey, I think this EQ should be boosted or compressor. And that's for the creative side. Me personally, that's what separates me from other engineers. And I'm not saying like makes me better or worse, but it gives me my own style, is because I'll do creative things like add delays at specific parts, and that goes into automation. A lot of newer engineers, they'll put a delay plug-in, let's say on a vocal, they'll put it directly as an insert on the vocal. Well, that limits your creativity, one, because you can't really automate it, and two, if you want to EQ the delay but not the vocal, you can't do that. So you want to set up your aux tracks. Those should already be set up before you even start the session for real. So have your aux track set up. And the creative process really comes through automation. And if, people that don't understand automation, it's simply setting up your DAW to do things without you having to do it in real time. So if you want one word to have a delay on it, then you will automate that one word just to have a delay on it. If you want the chorus, like a lot of, like for instance, I would use a practical example on A Billion Years that I did for Trip Lee. You can check that out on Spotify or wherever you want to. The actual hook has a lot more reverb on it than it does the verse, because to me it sounded way more open. The drums stop and it's just a guitar and someone singing. So I said, man, I want to make this feel way more impactful. So what I did was I put a reverb just on the hook part or chorus, and then I also turned the master output up by, I want to say 1 dB. So it actually sounds louder and it sounds more spacious during that one part. So it's very subtle, but if you take that part out, it's just going to sound flat, like a flat line. You want to make sure that your mixes go up and it goes down. It has peaks and valleys, right? So
that's what you would call dynamic range, right?
And dynamic range, exactly. You want to make sure it has dynamic range. And yeah, I mean, every song doesn't call for that, but that's up to you what you want to do. I mean, even panning, you know, instead of having the hi-hats just be in the center of the whole record, you can pan them left and right just for one verse. That tricks the ear into thinking something else is differently is happening. And if you go listen to your favorite records, I mean, Kendrick Lamar, you can go listen to Gunna. And I mean, I was just listening to a Gunna record today, and it sounded like a straight ahead kind of mumble rap trap. But as I'm listening to the record, I'm like, oh, wow, like they actually panning stuff from left and right. The piano gets brighter during the hook, but when he's rapping, it gets darker. So they're probably using 2 different EQs or creating 2 different channels, and then that way when the hook comes in, it's way more brighter. It opens you up, makes you want to dance. But then when the verses come, it darkens up, so it kind of closes you in. The whole point of mixing to me is to evoke emotion. You don't want to just have it be. It doesn't. You don't want it to stand still. People should really feel something when the hook comes in. They should feel something. And the basic things you can start out, because I know this is too complex maybe to really dive into, but just do basic things. Like if you're doing a rap track, if an artist says something crazy, drop the beat. Like just take the whole beat out and just let that word come in. That's like basic creativity things, right? And the thing is, the artist doesn't expect any of those things because they've been listening to this record for probably 1,000 times. So their ears are going to pick up on it immediately. They're, oh man, he dropped the beat when I said this. Ooh, that's crazy. So that adds value to you, and only you can decide where you want to drop the beat at. I mean, my man, like Kyren, like if you had the same exact song, a rapper in a 2-track, and I had the same song, and we didn't mix it, it's just the goal would be drop the beat where you think it sounds tight. I guarantee you're going to drop the beat at a different part than I would drop the beat, right? Because certain words will impact me versus you. So, but that gives you the edge over the other engineer. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's really the creative side, man.
Can I throw this out there too?
Yeah, sure.
You know, this is me talking to people more on the mixing, on the master, and so I'm not shy to say that, you know, my credits come from mastering. You know, my Billboard charting credits, and I'm not award winning like Big Bro yet, but it's definitely coming one day. But
absolutely,
I feel like for myself, I brought a lot of things over from mastering. So I know there's YouTube tutorials and stuff like that, but when people are working with rappers or maybe other genres, but hip hop, pop, R&B, you know, there are situations as a mixing engineer where you may not have the 2-track, where you may not have the stems or the multi-tracks of the beat. And there's even a difference between stem and multi-track. Stems are picking up exactly where the producer left off, exactly where the track engineer left off. Multi-tracks is just raw. And I would not advise multi-tracks. I would advise what Iz said, to make sure that when you have those stems that they're printed exactly where they left off. That way you don't got to start at 0. You can start at 50 or wherever they may be. But I would encourage people, and I learned this from Iz as well, mid-side processing. This is a secret in mixing and mastering that will go far. Now, people want me to do mastering tutorials on this. Forget y'all. Y'all gonna pay for that. That's a secret. But I will tell you on a 2-track instrumental, this is phenomenal. Like, because mid-side is my bad, bro. I really should let you talk about this, but y'all gonna see how much I've learned from Iz because I sound like him. When you talk, if you look at a WAV file inside of your DAW, there's only 2 lines. There's the top line, there's a bottom line. There's the left, there's the right. Those are just 2 mono signal. But in the middle, you have this ghost frequency or this ghost note that doesn't exist. So technically, if we heard a WAV file, if we seen a WAV file like we heard it, there would be 3 lines. There would be left, there would be middle, and then there would be right. But we know that middle is just a ghost effect of panning the left, hard left, 100%, and then panning the right, 100%. So when you talk about mid-side processing and the mixing and or mastering process, you're able to affect everything in the middle differently than the sides, right? And we're talking about from EQ, compression, everything. Like, you can do different things, even just the volume, how Iz was talking about, to rebalance things. So if you don't have stems, this is like the closest thing to doing it on a 2-track. I guarantee you it will make you look like a rock star, especially to a producer. You know what I mean? If they send you
is golden, man. Like, that's a secret that not a lot of people know about, but you know, it'd be real. I don't want to dive deep into it. I mean, I would love to, but I know the podcast is going longer. But you know, if you don't know what mid-side processing,
talk about it.
If you don't know what mid processing is, you have to go on YouTube and try it out. Most plugins allow you to do mid-side processing, and you know, a lot of people use that in mastering, as Kyren said. But as a mixing engineer, I use mid-side processing a lot. And long story short, it allows you to process the left and the right signal versus what's in the middle. So for instance, if you had let's say your vocals are in the middle and your kick is in the middle and your guitars are on left and right, so very basic, and you're like, man, the vocals don't sound bright enough but the guitars sound bright. So if you go boost an EQ on the whole mix, now the guitars are going to sound too bright and the vocals are going to sound perfect. So if you use mid-side processing, that allows you to just go in the mid where the vocals is, the center, I don't want to say mid, but center, and boost just those frequencies in the center without affecting the left and right image. And you can do a lot of tricks with that, especially like on synthesizers or even piano tracks. You put mid-side processing on it and it makes everything sound wider. So when you listen to like a Drake track, and you listen to those synths, and it really is just some synths and a kick and a snare and Drake. And you're like, man, how does this sound so full? Well, it's because it's mid-side processing. They're processing the left signal, the mid signal, different than the left and the right. So that allows you to get a way more fuller sound. Now, what you don't want to do is just go crazy with it, because if you do, it's going to sound real. Mid-side processing is like the salt to food. Salt tastes good, but if you put way too much on it, it ain't gonna taste good. You got to do it a little bit. A little bit goes a long way with the mid-side processing. And you can do that with anything. You can do mid-side processing with compression, with EQing, with chorusing, delays. I mean, that's one of my tricks, and I'll give this trick out. That's why I put my delays and my reverbs on aux tracks, because I do mid-side processing on my delays, so that way it sounds a lot wider instead of it just sounding like it's in the center or it's on the left and right, like a ping pong is going left speaker, right speaker. If you do mid-side processing, it's going to sound way wider and give it that fullness. So that way you don't have to turn the delay up so much for the audience to hear it, and you can do mid-side processing because it's going to be outside of the speakers is what it's going to sound like. Hey. So yeah, it's a
hand clap. Hand clap for that secret. Hand clap for that, dog. That's a gem right there, man. I mean, when you talk about everything that you're just talking about, it is a perfect display of how fundamentals and the art of mixing go hand in hand. If you don't know the fundamentals, you can't maximize your creativity because you don't know what the heck to do. At the end of the day, one of the first things Israel taught me about, and then I remember very vaguely, he said, "Dog, if you don't remember anything else that I've taught you, you need to understand the importance and how vital gain staging is, and especially." If you start working in what we call a hybrid format, where you're using analog and digital together, dog, if you don't know gain staging, you're going to be hit at the end of the day. Because in the analog world, gain staging is basically opposite of what digital is. Analog makes noise, so you got to raise above that floor noise. So when you talking about older records, like how Iz is talking about Marvin Gaye or the Thrillers or Prince, Michael Jackson and them kind of cats, like tape machines and analog equipment made noise. So you actually had to have the signal loud enough to raise above that noise and then hit the sweet spot of the converter, that compressor, that console, that tape machine, and then that start to do something pleasurable to the ear, what we call odd, even, harmonic, saturation, distortion, whatever you want to call it, in these different ways. But in the bots is different. And it's crazy to me that nowadays these interfaces we use, we got Thunderbolt 3 interfaces that are like 24-bit with bit rates of 192, 196, like crazy stuff, and people are still recording vocals and instruments super hot with these super quiet interfaces. I just mixed the album and bro, the vocals, even when I gain stage the vocals down, it still sound like a decapitator was on the vocal, bro. It was terrible. And I had to tell the artist, I was like, this is the 4th album since 2018 I worked with this artist, and I was like, yo, you either need to get new equipment or you need to get better knowledge of the equipment you use. And I said, I guarantee you, it's probably not the equipment you're using. It's probably your knowledge of the equipment. You've been doing this too long now. You know better than this. Like, it's hard for me to mix this and you're recording these hot signals like that. So sorry, man. I'm not trying to get on a tangent, man. But to people out there,
that goes back to communication.
Yep.
It goes back to what we talked about earlier. So you effectively communicating with the artist. Now, a newer engineer will be like, oh, that's just the way it is. Let me go ahead and try to salvage it. But the artist don't care. If the vocals sound like trash when he gets it back, he's going to put that blame on you. But you wasn't having it, and you said, look, man, I can't work with this. And that just goes back to effective and direct communication. Not just communication, but direct.
I can work with it. I can work with it because he can work with that invoice. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, just know that if you bring, I'm gonna go Israel and use analogies on y'all. If you bring a dusty, bent up hoopty through a car wash, it's gonna come out a shiny, dented up, better looking hoopty. At the end of the, you can't expect a pull up 2023 Tesla that costs $150,000, but that's not what you brought through the car wash originally. You cannot expect engineers to work magic. Now, some cats like Jason Joshua, they say magic can happen. What they mean by that is they can do way more than you. That's what they mean by that's what magic as an engineer means. I can do way more than you're capable of doing. Whitney Houston can sing way better than me, but that don't make her David Blaine. You know what I'm saying? Jay can't rap better than me. Jay-Z, if you listen, hey, come. I'll show you the real Rock Nation. I'm just playing. But when somebody has high abilities, like you said, LeBron can play way better than me, but I guarantee you Steph Curry probably don't look at it as magic. He just respect it. So, that communication. Now, going back to the art of mixing, we talked about mid-side, gain staging, and different things like that. Automation, here's other secrets. Most of the time now, and most DAWs, you can split things out and do certain things to that section. So say if you don't want to automate an EQ in a certain spot, you might just say the first 4 bars of a verse. You might just be able to, take that part of that track and then do what they call clip events and just filter that part differently. That's kind of like, a cheat code of automation. Talk about some of that, bro, how you can do that kind of stuff to be creative as well.
Yeah, I mean, I as a poor man's automation, I do that all the time.
I do too. I'm lazy.
If it's something that's quick, why set up a bus to do that? So, for instance, if you had a vocal, let's say a lead vocal on the verse, and the first verse they're singing quietly or they're rapping kind of quietly, but then the other half of the verse they getting more emotional. So obviously you can't just leave the compressor at the same 4-to-1 ratio with the whatever settings you have. You're going to have to adjust the threshold or adjust the ratio. So instead of doing a bus and setting all that up, just duplicate the track, cut off the other half, because obviously you don't want the volume to increase. So cut off one section, cut off the other one, so that way it's one continuous track, but it's on 2 tracks, if that makes sense. So one half is on track 1, the other half is on track 2, and then on track 2 you can go ahead and change the settings for the compressor to make it sound like it's more compression. Or if you want to do a little bit of delay on the second half of it, if I don't want to automate that part, I'll duplicate it, do what I just said, put the delay directly on the track, and call it a day. So if it's something simple like that, you don't want to do more work. Again, going back to the other principles, the longer you work on a record, mix a record, the worse it's going to sound. So if I can do this more quickly and get the same result, then that's what I want to do. So I don't want to say poor man's. It's just that's a more efficient way to do. It's kind of like the Waves one knob plugins. If you need a filter, why go through all of your plugins and then try to get a filter? Just go to Waves one knob. It's one knob. Here's your filter, and there you go. So you want to be able to do that kind of stuff.
All right, I'm gonna get one thing in terms of mixing in the DAW, and then I before we get off here, I gotta bring some other stuff while I got you on the phone. Let's talk about the mix bus or the master bus real quick. Now, in my opinion, another secret is that I think people spend too much time on individual tracks sounding better sometimes when they don't realize, like, if you put together a dope master bus chain, it can lift burdens off of you at times. This is just my opinion. You let me know if you disagree or not. But if you put a pull tech on your master bus, maybe certain tape emulations, maybe a SSL bus compressor, a certain Neve or whatever it may be, you know what I mean? Like, there are post EQs, because sometimes if you're doing this, then you may lose this and you got to bring it back. Like, there's like the master bus can make an impact. And I hear a lot of guys like preaching, oh, don't EQ on this or don't do this. Man, bro, I didn't know there was rules to this. At the end of the day, if it take 50 plugins on the master bus, do what you got to do. I don't encourage that, but I just know that the master bus is something that I used to be totally against when I first started mixing records, because just like you, I didn't know what I was doing fundamentally until you gave me the game around 2013, 2014. I just was doing what I thought worked, and that was that. I developed my own little system, and it worked for me and my record label in-house at the time. But talk about the mix bus real quick. You know what I mean? Like the importance of like how mix bus processing can impact the overall mix much quicker than just individualizing everything.
Yeah, I mean, I use the master bus. I would say 30 to 50% of most of my mixes come from the master bus. I read, when I was early on, no, you got to do it individually, and I tried that, and it just didn't work for me. So, I start off, I don't start off with a whole master bus chain. I do that individually from song to song. But once I get the basic mix sound, and that's another thing too, I do multi-bus processing. So I'll have a stereo output just for, or a master track just for my drums, a master track just for my vocals, a master track. So instead of just doing everything on the master track where everything is going, I'll create master tracks for the individual elements. So drums, bass, vocals, instruments. So that way I don't have to do so much on the actual master bus. So all of my drums will be going through an SSL compressor or plug-in, SSL emulator, and a pull tech. All of my vocals were going to be going through a LA2A. So that way, again, I don't have to go through, if it's 20 vocals in a song, I don't want to have to go through and EQ each individual one of them, because if one vocal needs more high end, more than likely all of them are going to need more high end. So rather than put an EQ on each one, send them all to the vocal bus and the EQ is already there, right? So I'm relying on bus processing, not only on the master bus, but the individual buses that I create. But specifically on the master bus, yeah, pretty early on, I'll put a compressor on there, put an EQ. And another dope secret that a lot of people don't know about, the way that you can use the master bus, is a trowel. Because you can say, man, this mix sounds, something ain't hitting right, like it sounds kind of dull. Let me boost the high end. But if you put the EQ on the master bus, you boost the high end, and then now everything starts to sound shrill, but the drums don't sound shrill. It's like, man, them drums really knocking the way I want with this high end boost, but everything else sounds terrible. So what I'll do is take that EQ that I had on the master bus and put it on my drum bus. Now everything else in the mix sounds great, and then my drum bus sounds like the way I want to, but it's more like a trial. I put it on the master bus to see what actually needed high end boost and what actually didn't. Sometimes you don't know. It's just trial and error and experiment. So yeah, sometimes I'll put a reverb on the whole master bus, not because I would leave it on there, but I'll be like, man, it sounds dry. Put the reverb on the whole master bus. I'm like, man, them vocals sound crazy, but now everything else sound washed out. Well, now I know I need to put the reverb on the vocals and not everything else. So you can use the master bus in that way too. But typically speaking, I'll probably, on any given mix, I'll probably have about 5 plugins. Usually the chain goes a compressor at first, and then an EQ, and then another compressor, and then another EQ, and then maybe some tape saturation as the 5th plugin. But usually it goes somewhere in that order. You know what I mean? I always have the EQ last because you want to keep that dynamic range. Because if you put the compressor last, then the compressor is going to kill your dynamic range no matter what. It's going to sound stale. But if you put the EQ last, then when you boost the low and boost the high, now every time that kick hits, it's going to sound louder than everything else. And every time the vocal sings, it's going to sound louder because the EQ is the last in the chain. And that's another thing, knowing about how your signal chain goes. Like, the EQ after a compressor sounds much different than the EQ before a compressor. You know what I mean? So you need to learn that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's another gem right there. So you need to experience.
Can I throw a gem in there with you? Did more from the mass. So if you are doing mix bus processing, unless you IsRael Musiq, I really don't care what you say, but he's going to agree with this. If you do not have a sidechain filter on that compressor, do not use it. Especially,
100%. I don't use any compressors on the master bus unless it has a sidechain. 100%.
And I'm talking about setting that joker to like 100, 130, 150. Like, you really want to tell that. So a sidechain filter on the compressor is basically, you're going to tell the compressor to, hey, ignore all of my low end. So let me give y'all some IsRael gems that he got so many gems, he don't even know how to pull them all out. So in a song, how he was talking about dynamic range is the lowest part of a song and the loudest part of a song. So what a compressor is going to do is like even that out so that, you know, transients and different things are not jumping out so randomly. So prime example, on a vocal, if one word is real loud, one word is real soft, it's going to level that out. So your favorite performer is not that good, right? Those compressors are helping that performance. Same thing with a mix, but you don't want it to do it on a mix like you would on a vocal or maybe a super loud guitar or something like that. On a mix, you really want it to kind of just do a little bit. So the first thing that a compressor is going to go for is the low end. Low end takes up the most range in the frequency spectrum. So on a mix, if you're talking about the overall mix, if you don't have that sidechain filter, the compressor is just going to start squashing your low end. And especially in hip hop and most modern music, if you spend 2 hours getting a mix together and then a compressor messes it up in 20 seconds, your client ain't going to be happy. You know what I'm saying? And so that sidechain filter is a way that you can do that. Israel put me on game to that, about a decade ago. And not only that, but you can put that on, you can use that with vocals. You can use that with delays. Iz taught me about EQing, effects buses. So if you have a reverb, you can, set a filter on that if you're compressing a reverb, or you can filter off the low end on a reverb so it's not muddying up with the vocal. I mean, there's just so much stuff, man, that we can dive into. But on my processing, since it is dropped, when I come in, I'm coming in. I'll be specific with my master bus chain is on my mix bus right now. After I come in, because I'm summing analog, so I'm doing stuff analog. But when I'm coming back in digitally, I got the SSL Fusion imager first. Very, very dope. I don't know if you mess with that plug or not, but that's a super dope. I know the outboard as well, but I got the Fusion first. Depending on the mix and how hard I'm pushing, I will put the IK Studer A80 emulation. After that, I'm going to Pultec emulation. After that, I'm doing the SSL bus compressor emulation because I got one outboard, but then I'm still doing one in the box because it's been a part of my sound for like a decade now. I can't get rid of it. And then I'm doing what Iz said again. I'm doing a post EQ because with all of that, there's a lot of color. There's a lot of natural compression going on. So I'm bringing some of that stuff back out at the end of the day. And so that's what my chain is looking like right now, man. Kind of similar to the guy that taught me. And if you don't think our stuff work, come mix with us and see what's gonna happen to you. Because I am a descendant of him. The difference between me and is that I probably push stuff harder and brighter. He'll listen to one of my mixes like, bro, you need to tame down that high end a little bit, or you was pushing too hard. But many moons ago, Israel told me that my mixes is like down south women. They got big booties on them. You know what I'm saying? So, he said, you a Miami bass kind of cat. You always low end always. Hey, he know I'm telling the truth, man. That's why I'm mastering. I was kicking a lot of dudes. You know what? Is because I'm figuring out how to get these songs at 6 LUFS. And you know that they're squash, but it don't sound like it. It's loud. It feel like it got dynamics, but you look at the waveform and you like, it don't. Or you know that I'm pushing too hard, but it don't sound like it's clipping. That's a whole nother master. That's a whole nother creative.
That's the creative side. That's an art in and of itself. Because a lot of engineers, what I see the common mistake is they want things louder, so they go to ozone or fab filter or whatever limiter that they want to go to, and then they just push the levels up, and that's not how you get things loud. Like, that's not how you get.
All I'm gonna say on the mastering tip, even though we're talking about mid-side processing, Now I will get this gem out as well. I learned this from Iz, and I learned this from experience. If you want a louder mix, then learn the art of using saturation. You got to get into that parallel and saturation. If you parallel different kind of saturations and distortion, I guarantee you will end up with a louder mix overall than a cat. You have no choice but to have a louder mix. I mean, saturation is what tricks the ear into thinking something sounds louder or not. Because at the end of the day, if you had a vocal, right, and you had, let's say, forget a vocal. Let's just say an 808, right, since we're talking about low end. You had a straight 808 with no saturation or nothing on it. It's just a straight 808. Ew. And I'm not talking about the new 808s. I'm talking about like the old school 808, like, 1990s 808, just a little boom. And you had that same 808, but you put decapitator on it and put them at the same exact levels in your DAW. So one is hitting at negative 6 dB, the other one is hitting at negative 6 dB. And you go back and forth between those two, your ear is going to think that the one with saturation sounds louder, because our ears pick up on saturation. Because saturation is not a natural thing in the natural world. There's nothing that you hear that's saturated in the natural world. The only time you hear things that's saturated in the natural world, I'm not talking about amplification like speakers, but in your natural everyday life, is when something is too loud. Then your literal ears start to distort. So you can trick your ear because your brain doesn't know the difference between real distortion, like real life distortion, and created distortion. So that's why, like, if you listen to,
rock music, why does, like, when you listen to a blues guitar, right? Like, listen to the blues, and they got a guitar, and it sounds quiet, it sounds soft, it sounds mellow, but then you run it through an amplifier and distort it, even though it's all at the same volume. You listen to a rock record and listen to a blues record, they can be the same exact volume, but the rock record is going to sound a lot louder. It's because it's the saturation, or the distortion. So yeah, I always have a distortion bus. I don't like to put distortion directly on the. I mean, sometimes I do. There's no rules, but I already know I want distortion, so I already have a decapitator and also another plugin by Plugin Alliance called VSM. Those are natural saturators, so I have those on a aux or bus, so that way anytime I need to saturate something, I just do it in parallel. And that's another secret too. Do things in parallel when you want things to be heard but not felt. So yeah,
it's all about control. All about control, man. Yep. So man, we can keep going, man. We racking up about an hour, but I gotta get one more thing, because nowadays, first off, bro, hand clap to all of that, man. And these 2 episodes, bro, you dropping so many gems. We got to do it again, unfortunately, man, because it's just too much stuff, man. But to talk about, I got to talk about analog. I'm not going to do analog versus digital, because I think that debate is stupid. I think analog and digital can work together because they both do different things greatly. But the gap is closing, and I think in today's realm, man, you could really get away with just analog summing and just having like some master bus processing in the analog world, and I think digital can take care of the rest, man. It's no longer necessary to have to print, vocals through compressors and all the, EQ. Like, man, if you got the right plugins and you know how to work stuff, man, it can happen. So with analog summing versus digital summing, for people that don't know, summing is basically is what it said earlier, is taking every individual element in your mix, everything about that song, and then making that into a playable format, right? So a wave or MP3 these days, that playback, that's summing. So your DAW automatically does that. When you export a mix out, that's summing. At the end of the day, even in mastering, even though it's 2-track, you're still summing. Like, that's summing, taking the concept of taking these multiple things and summing them down. Well, in the analog world, on tape especially, when digital was created, they realized, hey man, we lost some stuff. We lost space, we lost depth, we lost width, we lost some color, we lost headroom. So there's things called analog summing devices that were invented to basically take kind of like the best of digital and analog and say, hey, we want to bring this vibe back. Now, I've talked to you personally off the record, and you said you feel like the gap is closing. But real quick, we got to talk about analog versus digital summing. Where do you see things right now? Does analog summing, is it still valuable for people who are more advanced and have the budget? Should they make that investment? Like, just talk about that as a former sales rep and an experienced engineer yourself.
I mean, yeah, I definitely prefer analog summing over digital summing for sure. But with that being said, there's a lot of plugins that emulate analog summing. One that comes to mind off the top of my head is Slate. They got the VMS, which emulates 5 different consoles. I think 2 SSLs, API, Neve, and a tube console. So if you can't afford a summon box, your summon, that comes, you spending at least probably $2,000-$3,000 on the whole setup, because that goes back to your audio interface. Why people be like, all I need is 2 ins and 2 outs for my speakers. But if you're doing analog summon, each part that you send out to the summon device, you have to have an output for that. So
you better be prepared to spend like $4,000 on something.
Yeah, it gets expensive. But if you have the budget to do it, man, that wouldn't be the first thing I buy. I would invest in better speakers, other that, all that stuff. But yeah, analog summon is definitely superior. But this is coming from some engineer for over 20 years who've heard this stuff back and forth. 99% of your clients are not going to be able to hear it, but you will. You know what I mean? And it's not about some things are not about if it actually makes it sound better or not. It's about what makes you work better. So if you can hear the difference in your studio, then do it. And I heard the difference in my studio when I went to Analog Summit. I don't have it right now at the moment, but I'm going to get back to it. But it's a lot of boxes out there, and essentially it just adds, like what Kyren said, it adds color to it. Well, some summon boxes add color, but all of them are going to add width, and all of them are going to add. I don't want to say depth because I think that's a little false narrative, but definitely width and space around each individual instrument. And the reason being is because in a DAW, everything is perfect. So there's no anomalies in when you put your stems into the DAW. Everything is perfect, which that's why it sounds cold, it sounds sterile. But when you putting your stuff through an analog circuit, each channel is a little bit different because you got the op amps, you got the FETs, all of those individual circuits sound different. They have different tolerances. So if you sum 16 channels or 8 channels, whatever amount you want to sum, all of those little different subtleties add up to make things sound like they're in their own space. So, yeah, to answer your question, if you can afford it, definitely do it. Now, which one you pick, you're going to have to listen to files online. There's a whole website that I used to go to before I was a sales engineer that literally lets you listen to any compressor, any record, not any record, but they have records before with digital summon, and then they have summon boxes that we print this through an SSL, we print this through a Neve summon box, and you can hear the difference immediately. So I would start there to see which one you like. But if you can't afford it or you don't even want to get into all that, then start with the Slate VMS. Waves actually has a digital summon plugin that they use as well. But yeah, I would advise that, you know, every engineer should have some type of digital summon emulation because it adds that saturation and that characteristic without having to spend all the money.
Even if you come up with your own, how you may, you know, create sub buses like he was talking about with decapitators, and you know, you can. That's the dope thing about nowadays. There's no rules, so you can definitely do it. I will say this though, for anybody looking for any really most typical analog gear, rather summon or individual EQs, compressors, or whatever. If you are the type of mixing engineer that wants to retain all of your transients and retain that very kind of, you know, bouncy kick and all of that stuff, then stay digital then. If you like cleanness and if you like perfection, stay digital. Don't go analog, because analog is going to smear your low end in a good way. That, like, is it am I tripping, or does analog kind of like grow your low end up naturally? Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely smears it because it takes time. It takes each one of those components is going to actually slow your transients down, because each one of those components, the attack is going. It doesn't really smear your low end as much as it tames your high end. So the low end sounds smeary, and it's just because each one of those components, the electricity is literally slowing the transient down. So yeah, it you know, and that's why if you listen to, let's say, a Future record versus a Marvin Gaye record, the Future record is going to sound way more punchier. It's not because those engineers didn't know how to do that. It's because the gear literally wouldn't allow them to do it. So generally speaking, if you're doing more modern music, you don't want stuff to be vibey. You want stuff to be clear, precise. Yeah, definitely stick with you know, digital. If you're doing EDM, like, all that stuff is digital and EDM, you know, because the kick has to hit, everything has to be snappy and transient. You want to stick with digital, but if you want things to have more of a vibe, more of a tape kind of sounding, kind of a, I don't want to use the word smear, but more of a smoothness to everything, the analog is generally the way to go.
Yeah, for sure, man. Look, man, I could keep going all night, but man, we already an hour into this thing, if not over an hour, and we wanna let the people, you know, rest up, man. I appreciate you for being here. Round of applause, man. if y'all listen to this, for anybody that knows me personally, if y'all listen to this dude, you know where I get it from. You know what I'm saying? So this is Board Talk episode number 5. As of now, this wraps up the Art of Mixing series. We got a part 1 and a part 2, but this is so deep that we might have to bring Is back on for a part 3. So y'all be blessed.
Yeah.